Welcome to Conversations with Chuck Hester, a weekly podcast designed to inform and entertain you and introduce you to some really interesting and inspiring people. I'm your host, Chuck Hester. Today's guest is Craig Newmark, one of my favorite people and a pay-it-forward hero. Craig is a web pioneer, philanthropist, and leading advocate on behalf of trustworthy journalism, veterans and military families, and more. In 1995, Craig started curating a list of San Francisco events he emailed to friends and colleagues. When Craig turned it into a company, he monetized minimally, opting for a business model that prioritized doing well by doing good. Today, more than 5 billion ads have been posted on the site, which is known as Craigslist, the vast majority for free. In 2016, he created Craig Newmark Philanthropies to promote investment in organizations that effectively serve communities and drive broad civic engagement at the grassroots level. Craig serves on the board of directors of a range of nonprofits, including Blue Star Families, Center for Public Integrity, Consumer Union, Consumer Reports, Girls Who Code, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Poynter Foundation, Sunlight Foundation, Vets in Tech, and Women in Public Service Project. He also serves on the board of overseers of the Columbia Journalism Review. Craig, I've got to say, I don't know how you find time to do things. I mean, the list there alone for your projects is amazing.
I just do what's necessary. My deal is that my work ethic has been refashioned as a customer service rep. So I just do what needs to be done. Beyond that, I just do what I have to do to, when it comes to boards, I do what makes sense. Some of those boards, frankly, I'm not very active in. Some of them I'm extremely active in.
Yeah. So, I was mentioning to you earlier before we got on the broadcast, a lot of people finding out that I was going to be talking to you today wanted to be sure to ask this question, which I will definitely do that. And that is, let's talk about before Craigslist, what your origins were. I know approximately what it was, but I'd love my listeners to learn more about who you were and what you did when you first started out.
Basically grew up in New Jersey, a town called Morristown. I didn't realize until very recent years that I grew up in an area which was both historically immigrant and also light industrial, such that across the street from my house, there was a junkyard. However, the junkyard I played in was the one up the street owned by family friends. My deal is that a lot of what I'm about was shaped in Sunday school by Mr. and Mrs. Levin at the Jewish Community Center there. They taught me to treat people like I want to be treated. They taught me that I should know when enough is enough. And they gave me early training on countering disinformation by telling me that bearing false witness is wrong. Now, apparently, we received those directions a few thousand years ago, but they still seem very fresh as into this very moment itself. Unfortunately, I didn't socialize very well, and I wound up being a nerd of the original form. Plastic pocket protector, thick black glasses taped together, no social skills. And even now, if I show any signs of displaying social skills, that's an illusion. I can only do it for a short amount of time, and after about 90 minutes, I will get very cranky.
So you started out your career as, I've seen, by the way, the posts that you put up about 26 years with Craigslist and a pocket protector and a pen. Great visual for that. Now, you started your tech career, though, with what company? What was that start?
Well, the way I think of it, I was doing tech work, help desk work when I was still at college, Case Western Reserve in Cleveland. But my first real job as such, that was at IBM in South Florida, specifically Boca Raton. They no longer have that facility, but I recall fondly the alligator which got into the artificial lake, and all the birds and turtles that wound up being visitors. Oh, I don't want to forget armadillos on site as well.
Hmm.
I spent 17 years with IBM, first South Florida, then Detroit, and finally a year in Pittsburgh.
Ah, yeah. So I was in Pittsburgh. I grew up in Pittsburgh, as a matter of fact. So on the south side of the area, Upper St. Clair area, but love it well. So how did you end up in San Francisco? When did that occur?
Um, in '93, I was observing that IBM was going through a series of meltdowns, and I knew that it was time for me to try something new in terms of a company. I should try something new in terms of geography. So I spoke to folks at Charles Schwab and Company and took a job offer from them. And they moved me all the way across country to San Francisco, which I appreciate. And that worked out pretty well. Schwab had its own issues, but I got lucky as a tech guy could get, because there were issues at Schwab early '95, and I was able to get out with a good severance package, and I was starting to do something that I wound up eventually calling Craigslist.
So talk about Craigslist, because I mean, most people obviously, I think, know of you from that, and it's interesting too because you and I met in San Francisco, golly, ages ago. You gave me your business card, and the business card basically said Craig Newmark, customer service. That's all it said. So you've always told me when I've had conversations with you that you're a customer service rep, and that's kind of the bottom line for you. But so Craigslist started out as an email that you sent out about San Francisco events to friends. What was the progression from there?
Well, you're talking early '95, not long after departing Charles Schwab and Company, and I figured I would send out emails to people I knew about events that sometimes were about technology, sometimes were about arts, and often combine the two. Just did that, grew word of mouth, and then grew more word of mouth, such that middle of '95, I had to use a listserv like Major Domo, because the CC list in the email tool I was using, it broke at about 240 addresses.
Hmm.
And if you're going to use a listserv, you got to have a name for the thing. And as a nerd, I'm pretty literal. So I was going to call it SF events, San Francisco events. People around me, though, told me they already called it Craigslist, that I had inadvertently created a brand. They explained to me what a brand is, and because I didn't know before, and they were right. I created my own brand identity, and I went with it. That's proven to be a pretty good idea, because with my name in the thing, I take everything personally. I take everything in a kind of personal, quirky way. That worked out pretty well. I mean, there's more to the story, but that's the origin.
Yeah. So my branding colleagues, if you will, would be fascinated to hear that Craigslist didn't start out by saying, okay, now what's our brand going to be? How's the logo look? All of that kind of stuff. It kind of evolved naturally, if you will, to see where that goes. So interesting to see how that happens. So you're at 200 plus or whatever it is, your Craigslist. How does it build to where we are today at 5 billion ads?
Just pretty much built word of mouth. We tried advertising for job postings once. It didn't work. So really all of our growth is word of mouth. And that was on a slow, steady, very long path. The first 3 years, it was all by myself. End of '97, we hit about 1 million page views per month, which was good for them. End of '87, volunteers wanted to help. Tried that out. And for that matter, in '97 too, job posters wanted to pay for job postings. We didn't object to that at all, so we tried that out. And in '98, ran on a volunteer basis, charged for job postings on an experimental basis. That worked okay. But at the end of '98, people approached me. They got hold of me telling me that volunteer basis just didn't work. So I decided I had to make the thing into a real company. One decision was monetization, and I remembered Sunday school, knowing when enough is enough. And so I charged minimally, as little as possible, decided to charge people for, well, I charged very little for ads which proved to be more effective than most. And we've maintained that philosophy to the current moment. That decision was not altruistic. It was not pious or anything like that. It just seemed that was the right thing to do.
I love that philosophy because that's something, for as a pay it forward advocate myself is like, and your philosophy of doing good by or doing well by doing good. I mean that kind of sums everything up,
Yeah.
as far as what you do. So
Yeah, by accident, the philosophy I introduced was doing well by doing good, but I didn't consciously think those words. Someone else figured it out for me. One other big decision in that time frame, in that year of 2000, when I was effectively CEO of Craigslist, by the time that year was ending, people helped me understand that as a manager, I suck. And so I had seen other tech companies where the founder hung on too long and did a lot of damage. So I decided that I would hire someone else as CEO. I had stopped coding already by that time, and so I became a full-time customer service
and that's not just lip service, right? So I remember when we talked a while back. I mean, you literally would be available on email and answer questions, or as a customer service rep, and being able to do that. So
Yeah, that was a big deal for me because remember, in Sunday school, I learned that I should treat people like I want to be treated. And that applies to customer service everywhere in what I regard as a big way. Um, Contemplate the last customer service you got. Could have been good, but these days I think the chances are better that it was not so good.
yeah. Well, like I said, you're one of my pay it forward heroes as far as that. And in 2016, you started Craig Newmark Philanthropies. Talk to me about what that's all about, because that's one of my favorite areas that you're working in now.
Yeah, like 10 plus years ago or so, people started asking me, how do I build, how does one build community online? And people, of course, to some extent, sometimes were asking for cash contributions, which is good. People should ask. And I started to do that, started to do it more over the years. Uh, Sometime, maybe 8 or more years ago, I tried putting all my philanthropic efforts under an umbrella called Craig Connects. That didn't go anywhere. It was my amateur attempt at branding and just didn't work. 5 years ago or so, I just decided to do Craig Newmark Philanthropies and started to get my act together in this regard. I mean, there's details to it that may or may not be any interesting. It involves my use of a personal foundation and a donor advised fund, which is how you do things these days. And I started to understand what I wanted to better support because ultimately, the stuff that I'm doing either helps people defend the country or protects or rewards the people who are defending the country. I'm simultaneously paying it forward, but also paying it back. For example, I have a lot of work that applies to helping out veterans and their families, and increasingly involves helping out active service troops and their families. A lot of work involves defending the country against disinformation related warfare, helping people defend themselves against harassment, related journalistic ethics, and even stuff like defending the country where the country has been attacked by people who don't wish us well. For example, people who've attacked the integrity of our voting systems. Currently, that kind of warfare occurs whenever you hear somebody complaining about the integrity of the election, which collectively we call attacks against election integrity, the big lie.
Yeah, and you and I bonded a lot on regards to veterans, and at one point in time, Veterans Bill of Rights, because I know you were actively involved with that. And that's an underserved community, and it's one, and I've had Dean Bunchu from the Bunker Labs on about veterans teaching veterans how to be entrepreneurs, because a lot of that issue that we run into is veterans trying to go into business, whether for themselves or working for a corporation. It's a total different mindset as far as that goes. So they're used to, Dean used to tell me, like, we're used to saying, okay, there's the hill, go take it, I don't care how you do it, as opposed to a meeting to talk about how you take the hill. So that's kind of the bottom line. How did you get involved with the veteran side of it? I know from your journalist background, but how did you get involved with veterans?
I'm guessing about 12, 13 years ago, I was at a PBS NewsHour thing in Colonial Williamsburg about rediscovering democracy. Wound up sitting next to some veteran advocates, got involved, then got very involved. And now that I'm involved on a daily basis, for example, 2 efforts have to do with getting veterans and their families enough food to eat, because the pandemic has greatly increased food insecurity for veterans and their families. And 2 days ago, a report came out reminding us that actually food security is a big issue for active service troops and their families. In addition, I'm focusing on tech jobs for veterans, since tech jobs are often the first steps in really good careers. And within that, my focus is on cybersecurity careers, because cybersecurity careers are really good careers for anyone to be involved with. And we need a lot more people trained in this country and elsewhere to protect us against people who wish us harm.
So, the question that always comes up, and when we talk about Pay It Forward Tuesdays, my soon-to-be 501c3 a lot, how can people get involved with what you're doing? How can they, come alongside, if you will, or, is there a place where they can go to take a look at what you're doing? I mean, we'll talk about social media in a little bit, but I'm just curious to see, hey, I heard Craig Newmark on the podcast, and this sounds interesting. How can I help? I mean, that's usually the part.
I'd say 2 paths. One, look at my site, craignewmarkphilanthropies.org, or craignewmark.org for short. Or alternatively, look at my tweet stream. I'm not smart at social media, but I'm okay at Twitter. So if you look at twitter.com/Craig Newmark, you'll see my stuff. You'll see an almost intolerable amount of stuff coming from Donors Choose, which helps teachers. But you'll see a lot of my veteran stuff. For example, today, Dr. Biden, was announcing a lot about joining forces. That was a Michelle Obama thing to support veterans' families and veterans, because as a country, we never really understood how much we owed veterans' families, because they give up a lot. We're reviving that program, or I should say Dr. Biden is reviving that program. I'm way in the background with working with Bob Woodruff Foundation, Blue Star Families, and others, because Bob Woodruff Foundation has a network called Got Your Six, meaning Got Your Back, and it includes a network of veterans organizations across the country who are good at their job, meaning they actually do provide really good support for veterans and their families. You may have noticed there's a lot of nonprofits in the country, and we need to focus on the ones that are good at their job, that get something done.
Yeah, and very admirable, Craig. And you mentioned, I would slightly argue with you that, you're not that great at social media, because, you and I interact there on LinkedIn, on Facebook. I follow your Twitter feed. As I do a shout out for Uplifters on a Friday, and you're always part of that, and greatly appreciate. And there's several things in there, but So, I got involved with social media early 2000s, as I'm sure you probably, because we talked about that. You, as Craigslist, started out as a listserv, for heaven's sakes, and then got into that. So, what's your take on social? I mean, is it something that you enjoy? Is it something that you think is necessary? How are you feeling about all that?
Social media is a good way to connect with people, and I do like that. I find it fulfilling. However, social media has also been weaponized by people who wish us harm. Some of them are bad actors from overseas. A lot more these days are bad actors operating within the country. These are people who are often running large scale scams. Some of them are on their way to being pretty thoroughly radicalized. And we've seen even some domestic terrorism. So, social media, I think, is great, but it also has some really big problems, which people are now beginning to address.
And is there a platform of choice? I mean, you mentioned Twitter, and we talked about this. You have 970,000 followers on LinkedIn, for instance. But that's mainly because you're out of connections and people want to follow you and hear what you have to say. But is there and we'll talk a little bit about this, Craig, because I happen to follow you on Facebook on a regular basis, and I know a couple of fun things that you like to do and post. But is there a platform of choice? If somebody said, okay, Craig, the only one platform for you, man, which one would you do? Which one would you?
Yeah, 80% of my social is Twitter. Now, I do the others to a lesser extent, and I'm very fond of posting my bird pictures on them.
Exactly.
And I do have a sense of humor. Let's just say that somebody made a remark. Apparently, a Komodo dragon got into a convenience store in Germany. That's what it looks like to me. And that turned out to be pretty entertaining. I do have a sense of humor. It's very active, but very dry.
Yeah, and greatly appreciated, by the way. I mean, I have a lot of fun, and some people may not know unless they've seen your Facebook stuff. You're a pigeon lover, right?
I love birds, and I'm fond of the neglected, the humblest of birds, pigeons. I do think there are replacement species, and I do support pigeon rescue groups. I've learned the hard way. Well, when they come over for a photo op of me with pigeons, there's a thing called pigeon pants. And the correct order is pigeon pants on the pigeon, then they can fly onto your shoulder. If you let them fly onto your shoulder first, you may pay a terrible price, and I have.
Yeah, and I think I get this right if I'm not mistaken, but I'll try this, and that is that squirrels are not your favorite animal.
Oh no, I'm very fond of squirrels.
Okay, I got that backwards.
I like animals which sometimes cross the boundary to human.
Mm-hmm.
So I am fond of seeing them, even if they're sometimes considered undesirable. In San Francisco, we do get raccoons, often playful, and we may get other animals which are normally perceived as unpleasant pests.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about COVID and the last year or so. How has that affected what you've been doing, what your charities that you're working with have had to deal with? How have you weathered through? Would probably be a good way to put that. And you've obviously seen some things that have changed, and including no in-person events, for instance. But talk about COVID for a little bit.
Well, hunger has been a problem in our country for a long time, bigger than it should have been. That is food insecurity. But several months ago, I realized that it was hitting veterans and their families much harder than it should. I mean, that really pissed me off. So I started an effort to help feed people, stretching what I could from my foundation. So I want to be feeding people with a special focus on getting vets and their families fed. So I've committed $25 million to this. A lot for me, not much compared to, say, a billionaire. And I figured that's my current effort. Right now, I'm working with those food groups to try to figure out how to do campaigns which would alert far more people to the need to feed people. Because until we come out of the whole COVID thing, economically, there's going to be tens of millions of Americans who need a lot more help getting fed. So we need to stretch our resources now until, until such a time as, say, we don't have to wear masks anymore. By that time, maybe we can relax when it comes to feeding people. Maybe not, I'm guessing. But we do need to feed people, and we do need to teach people for the new economy, because as we're moving from normal to a new normal, the nature of careers and jobs and so on, that's changing in a big way. The only change for sure I know is there may be a lot fewer people in retail or restaurants, and for a lot of people, a lot more meetings via Zoom or equivalent.
Craig, this has been an awesome time to get a chance to spend some time with you, and we can continue on. I always like to leave it with how can people get in touch with you, and we talked about craignewmark.org and also your Twitter account. I would suggest, guys, take a look at his Facebook account too, because there's some really fun stuff there. And he does have a dry sense of humor. There's no doubt about that. But is there anything that you would leave our audience with of how can they be of service, advice on, young entrepreneurs, anything along that line that you'd want to share?
Well, to be of service, figure out what causes whatever means something to you, and then find out what's going on online about it, and do what you can to qualify them to make sure they're not running a scam. If you have interest in some of the same areas I do, in veterans, women in tech, pigeon rescue, or like things like fighting harassment, fighting disinformation, protecting the country, then you can look at what I'm doing either at my site, craignewmark.org, or craignewmarkphilanthropies.org, or check my Twitter stream. Any of that will lead you to nonprofits who are doing really good work. And the idea is that, these are nonprofits with people who are good at their job. So they're running legit nonprofits and they're actually having an impact.
Well, and you bring that up, having an impact. And granted, your level of philanthropy is something that the average person may not be able to do, but they could still make a difference regardless. And that's the important aspect of that is, and it's interesting the way you put it, this pissed me off, so I'm going to do something about that. Well, if you're passionate about it or you're concerned about that, and honestly, as much as I know about veterans and veterans, I was not aware of the issue with veterans being fed, for heaven's sakes, and that pisses me off. And I probably will do some more in that regard. But Craig, I want to take just 2 seconds to thank you again, and thank you over the years for being accessible, quite frankly, as a personality, if you will, and somebody that you've always retweeted my information on the uplifters, and I greatly appreciate that. Like I said earlier, you've been a bad forward mentor in what you're doing, and matching funds on some really cool things, including Girls That Code and the veteran stuff, and the journalism aspect of what you've been doing. So thank you for taking this time. I know you're a very busy guy. Greatly appreciate that. I want to make sure that you stay safe and stay healthy, and we'll continue to have the conversation. Thank you, Craig, for being on the Conversations.
It's my pleasure, and it's all about my idea that a nerd's got to do what a nerd's got to do.
We'll leave it with that. Thank you, Craig Newmark. I greatly appreciate your time. Okay, well, that was another edition of Conversations with Chuck Hester, one of my favorite guys, as I mentioned earlier. So next week on our program, April 14th, my guest is Michael Schultz, CEO of Coffee and Tea Bar Holdings, interesting food and beverage entrepreneur. We'll talk a lot about how he's kind of reinvented himself around the COVID area and what's going on with that. So please feel free to share this podcast with your friends and connections. The replay will post very soon on Facebook and my YouTube channel. Also through anchor.fm, the audio of the podcast can be found on Google Podcasts and Spotify and many other channels. Now, I would be remiss if I did not mention, as I usually do, Pay It Forward Tuesdays initiative, which is my soon-to-be 501c3, 6 consultants coming alongside entrepreneurs and 501c3s and helping them with 3 hours of consulting work so that they have that directly. And we're going to be selecting a new recipient in April. So if you know somebody that you think would qualify for that, then go to payitforwardtuesdays.org. That is our website. And, shout out to Adam Sinkus and Jennifer Radke, Bob Shears, Brian Basilico, everybody that's helping out, and our newest one, Jeffrey Posey, on that. And on a personal note, I wanted to mention to you as well that what we've got going on is I'm moving back to Raleigh, North Carolina. And I want to shout out C's, which is the marketing agency that I'm working with and will continue to work with. But come summertime, if you're listening and you're in Raleigh, I'm coming home. So I'm really excited about being able to do that. Again, thank you for taking your time today as far as listening to us. And if you're interested in learning how to improve your marketing and LinkedIn presence, then connect with me on LinkedIn. Mention this podcast for a free 15-minute discovery call. And that's it for this week. And next time, this is Chuck Hester reminding you to stay well, pay it forward, and be safe. Thank you.